The night had a bitter taste. Cold wind whipped through the twisted trees of the forest, carrying the cries of creatures that were older than any living memory. Leora clutched her baby tightly to her chest, her small arms aching from exhaustion. Her heart pounded not only from the long run but from the fear that had been following her for days. The villagers she once called neighbors had turned against her. Their words were still fresh in her mind, whispers that she was cursed, that her child would bring ruin. They said we should be left to die, Leora whispered to herself, rocking her baby gently. The small infant's eyes, wide and trusting, blinked up at her. Despite the cold and hunger gnawing at her body, she pressed on. She could not let the child die. Not like this. Not alone. Branches scratched at her face and arms as she pushed through the underbrush. Each step felt heavier than the last, her body begging her to collapse. The forest seemed endless, and with every rustle in the dark she flinched, expecting to see the angry faces of the villagers chasing her. The prophecy had branded them both as dangerous, but Leora refused to accept it. She would survive. She had to. Hours passed, or perhaps days. Leora had lost count. The moon carved silver lines through the canopy above, guiding her path through the forest. She stumbled over roots and rocks, her dress torn, her hair matted with mud. Her baby cried softly, sensing her fear, and Leora whispered words of comfort she barely felt. "I'm here, my love. I won't let them take you. I promise." Ahead, she noticed a faint glow through the trees. At first, she thought it was another trap, another cruel trick of the villagers. But as she drew closer, the light revealed a ruin, a temple half swallowed by ivy and shadow. Its stone walls were carved with strange symbols, glowing faintly with a light that seemed alive. Leora slowed, feeling both relief and unease. This place was old, too old. Some part of her whispered that it might be dangerous. Yet the sight of a shelter after endless wandering was irresistible. She pressed her baby closer, stepping carefully into the temple's courtyard. The air was thick with magic, or perhaps it was only her imagination, sharpened by fear and exhaustion. The moonlight reflected off the carved statues of animals and warriors long gone. Leora's fingers brushed the cold stone, tracing the symbols. They were unfamiliar but comforting, as though the temple itself acknowledged her presence. A sudden growl echoed through the air. Leora froze, her breath catching in her throat. From the shadows emerged a pack of wolves, their eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. Leora's heart leapt. She had faced many dangers, but these creatures seemed different. Their movements were deliberate, almost intelligent, circling her slowly. Her baby whimpered in her arms, and she held it closer, her own fear threatening to overwhelm her. Before she could react, a figure stepped from the shadows. He was tall, clad in dark armor that shimmered like black glass in the moonlight. His presence was commanding, every step precise, every motion deliberate. The wolves stopped mid-step, tilting their heads as if recognizing someone far above their understanding. "Stay back," the figure said, his voice deep and calm, carrying authority like the echo of mountains. "They will not harm you while I am here." Leora stared, unable to speak. The man knelt slightly, one hand extended not toward her but toward the wolves. With a soft command, they lowered their heads and retreated into the shadows, disappearing as silently as they had appeared. Who are you?" Leora finally whispered, her voice trembling. The baby clutched at her chest, sensing both danger and protection. "I am Kale," the man said, his eyes like storm clouds, dark and unreadable. "You and your child are not safe here. Come with me." Leora hesitated. The name meant nothing to her, yet something in his presence inspired both awe and fear. He was not like anyone she had met before. His gaze pierced her, reading her exhaustion, her desperation, her sorrow. For a moment she saw not cruelty, but a kind of strength that promised protection even in a world that had abandoned them. I can't leave," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know you. How can I trust you?" Kale's expression softened slightly, though the shadow of his past lingered in his eyes. "Trust is not given lightly," he said, stepping closer. "But if you stay here, the forest will claim you before dawn. I can protect you. That is all I offer." Leora weighed her options. The forest outside was alive with danger, and the thought of leaving her child alone in its cold embrace made her stomach twist with fear. She took a shaky breath and nodded. I have no choice then." Kale extended his hand and she placed her baby gently in the crook of her arm. He lifted her over the threshold of the temple ruins, and together they moved into the shadows beyond, where the forest's grip was weaker, and the air felt charged with something ancient, something beyond understanding. As they walked, Leora tried to study Cale. He did not speak much, but his presence was like a shield, protecting her and her child from the unseen dangers lurking in the darkness. The wind carried distant screams, the echoes of villagers searching for them, but Cale's calm confidence kept her from panicking. Hours later, they reached a cliffside where the ruins ended, and before them lay a fortress carved into the rock, dark against the silver of the moon. Its towers reached high, crowned with spires that cut into the sky, and banners fluttered in the wind, black and silver with strange sigils. Leora's breath caught. It was both terrifying and magnificent. "This is your refuge," Cale said quietly, standing behind her. "Safe within these walls, nothing in this world can reach you or your child." Leora looked down at her baby, then back at the fortress. Her heart ached with fear and hope intertwined. She had been abandoned, rejected, and left to die countless times, yet here, at last, there seemed to be a chance to survive, a chance to live. But deep in her chest, a small voice whispered that this man, this fortress, and this power might come at a price she did not yet understand. And yet for now the thought of safety was enough. Kyle extended his hand again. "Come," he said. "The night is long, and the forest does not forgive weakness. You are stronger than you think, but even the strong need allies." Leora hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his. For the first time in many nights she felt a spark of hope. The baby in her arms stirred and blinked at the towering figure before them, sensing the strange protective aura that surrounded him. As they entered the fortress, shadows seemed to move in recognition, whispering of ancient power and forgotten kings. Leora's heart pounded with fear and anticipation. She did not know what awaited inside, whether she would find safety, danger, or something far more complicated. But she knew one thing: she could not turn back. Behind them, the forest stretched endlessly, dark and unforgiving. Ahead, the fortress rose like a mountain, alive with secrets, power, and something ancient waiting to be awakened. Leora clutched her baby closer, and together, they stepped into the unknown. Cliffhanger. Somewhere deep within the fortress, eyes watched them. Ancient and piercing. A voice whispered, soft and chilling. "At last, the child has come, and so has she." The fortress was alive with shadows. Every corner seemed to breathe. Every corridor whispered secrets older than Leora could imagine. She clutched her baby tightly, feeling the warmth of the small body against her chest. The child was quiet for now, lulled perhaps by the sense of safety that Kyle's presence radiated. Yet Leora's nerves remained taut. She had been hunted, rejected, and abandoned for too long to feel calm in a new place so easily. Kyle led them through towering halls carved from black stone. The walls gleamed faintly, etched with runes that pulsed like living veins. Flickering torches cast long, moving shadows that danced as they passed. Despite the grandeur, the air was heavy, weighted with old magic and unspoken power. "This place," Leora whispered, her voice almost lost to the vastness around them.
"It feels
alive." Cale did not answer immediately. His dark eyes scanned the halls, alert to movements she could not see. "It is," he said finally, his voice low and measured. "Everything here has a memory, a purpose. Few enter and leave unchanged. You should understand that, Leora. The world outside has abandoned you. Here, even the walls remember." Leora swallowed hard. She had spent days running, hiding from the world. Now in this fortress she felt exposed in a way she had not expected. Every corner seemed to watch her. Every shadow seemed to judge. But Cale's presence anchored her. There was strength in him, a power that made even the oldest magic of the fortress seem almost subordinate. He stopped before a massive door carved with swirling patterns of wolves and fire. With a push, it opened silently, revealing a room illuminated by a single silver light that poured from a circular skylight above. The walls were lined with shelves, strange artifacts, and scrolls that hummed faintly with energy. "You will rest here," Kyle said, gesturing to a small, cushioned alcove in the corner. "It is safe. No harm will come to you or your child while you are within these walls." Leora lowered herself to the floor, her back against the stone, and set her baby down gently on the soft cushions. The child's tiny hands reached up, clinging to her as if sensing the tension in her. She felt tears sting her eyes. Safe, she whispered to herself, almost disbelievingly. For the first time, maybe safe. Cale knelt beside her, studying the child with a strange intensity. His dark eyes softened for a moment, revealing a flicker of something Leora could not place. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, an understanding of what it meant to be alone and hunted. This child, he said finally, his voice quiet, is not like others. The world has labeled her as cursed, but that is only fear speaking. She is different, stronger than anyone realizes. Leora's heart clenched. She had long feared that her child's differences would be the reason they were rejected, the reason they were left to die, and yet, in Cale's words, she heard not condemnation but recognition. Something stirred inside her, hope, fragile and trembling. "What do you want from me?" she asked cautiously. "Why are you helping us?" Cale's gaze did not waver. "Because it is my choice," he said simply. "And because you and your child are part of a story I cannot ignore. Outside these walls, the world fears what it does not understand. Here I can protect you. That is all I offer, protection and guidance." Leora hesitated, her mind a storm of doubt. She had trusted once before and been burned. Could she trust him now? The weight of her child's life rested on her decision. She looked into Cale's eyes, searching for deceit, and found none. Only a dark, unyielding strength tempered with something she could not name. Finally, she nodded. I will stay," she whispered. "For my child's sake." Cale's expression softened slightly, though his dark eyes remained unreadable. "Good," he said. "Rest now. There will be time to speak later. For now, you need strength and your child needs you." Leora settled beside her baby, letting exhaustion pull her into a light sleep. The fortress seemed to hum softly around her, as if acknowledging her presence, as if it, too, had decided she was to remain. Cale remained at her side, silent, a sentinel in the shadows. Hours passed, though Leora had no way of knowing how long. When she awoke, the room was dim with the first light of dawn, silver streams falling through the skylight. Her baby cooed softly, reaching up toward her face, and she smiled through her fatigue. For a moment, the horrors of the forest and the cruelty of the villagers felt distant, almost unreal. Kyle stood near the doorway, watching her. "You should eat," he said. "Strength is necessary. There is much to learn, and dangers are never far, even within these walls." Leora took the offered food, simple bread and fruit, but enough to give her a sense of normalcy she had not felt in weeks. "I don't understand this place," she admitted softly. "Why does it feel alive? Like it knows who I am?" Cale's gaze turned to the distant horizon, where mist and shadow met the cliffs. "Because it does," he said. "These walls remember every king, every battle, every choice made here. The fortress is not simply stone and wood. It is a part of me, and soon it will be a part of you if you choose to accept it." Leora shivered at his words. She wanted to believe him, but the memory of the villagers' hatred still burned in her mind. Yet the thought of her child, growing in strength and safety under Cale's protection, forced her to push fear aside. As she ate, Kyle spoke of the outside world, of kingdoms in turmoil, of magic that had been hidden for centuries, and of powers that both coveted and feared the child in her arms. Leora listened, absorbing every word, understanding that her life had changed irrevocably the moment she stepped into the fortress. Days passed, and Leora began to explore the halls, always with Cale near. He never forced her to speak, but his presence was constant, like the shadow of a mountain, protective and intimidating. She began to notice small things about him. The way his eyes softened when he looked at her child, the way his hand never left the hilt of his sword, the way he listened to even the whispers of the fortress with intent focus. Yet despite his seeming calm, there was a tension in the air. Servants and guards treated him with reverence and fear. Even the walls seemed to respond to his commands. Leora realized that Cale was more than a man. He was a force of nature, and she had stepped into a world far beyond her understanding. One evening, as the sun set behind the cliffs, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, Leora noticed movement along the battlements. Shadows flitted among the towers, and whispers drifted through the halls. She felt a chill run down her spine. "Kyle," she said quietly, pulling him aside. "Someone is here. Someone is watching." He did not turn immediately, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I know," he said at last. "There are those who would harm your child. They see her power as a threat or as a tool. We must be vigilant." The world outside has not forgotten her, and some never will. Leora's heart clenched. The thought of her child in danger again, even here, made her stomach twist. "What can we do?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. Cale's gaze finally met hers, dark and unyielding. "We fight," he said simply. "We protect, we endure, and if necessary, we will make them regret ever coming near her." Leora felt a strange mixture of fear and awe. He was terrifying yet comforting, dangerous yet undeniably protective, and for the first time since her world had turned upside down, she felt that perhaps, just perhaps, they could survive. But as night fell, and the fortress grew silent save for the distant crashing of waves below, a shadow moved unseen through the halls. A figure whispered soft and menacing, "The child is here, and so is she. Soon their fate will be revealed." Leora did not hear the whisper, but Cale did. His hand tightened on the hilt of his sword, his eyes narrowing. Danger was near, and the fortress, alive as it was, seemed to sense it too. Cliffhanger. Someone or something had entered the fortress with a purpose, to take the child, to fulfill the prophecy. Cale could feel it in his bones. Leora's heart pounded as she sensed the shift in the air. The safety of the fortress was no longer guaranteed, and the first real test of their trust and strength was about to begin. The night in the fortress was heavy and still, but Leora could feel it. Something had shifted. The air was tighter, charged with a quiet tension that made her chest ache. She held her child close, rocking gently, listening to the soft rhythm of her baby's breathing. Outside, the waves crashed against the cliffs, but inside, the silence seemed louder. Cale sat nearby, his dark eyes scanning the hallways, every muscle coiled like a predator ready to strike. The whispers of the intruder from the night before had not faded. If anything, they had grown louder in his mind, a pulse of danger that set his senses on edge. "You need to rest," Kyle said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, but there was a weight to it that made Leora obey. "Even the strong cannot fight without strength." Leora nodded, though sleep did not come easily. Her thoughts wandered back to the forest, to the villagers' cruel rejection, to the nights she had hidden from death itself. She had survived by will alone, but Cale's fortress was different. Here the danger was more subtle, more intelligent, and she had no idea how it would strike. Hours later, the fortress erupted with movement. Cale was instantly alert, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword. Shadows danced along the walls, and the faint sound of whispering reached Leora's ears. Someone had entered the fortress again, and they were not hidden. "Stay here," Cale ordered, his voice low and commanding. "Do not leave the room under any circumstance." Leora's heart raced, but she nodded. She had learned to trust him, even when every instinct screamed that danger was near. Cale's presence was a shield, and though fear clutched at her, she stayed put, clutching her baby. The sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor. Cale moved silently, a shadow among shadows, until he confronted the intruder in the main hall. Leora could see them from a distance, a figure shrouded in dark robes, moving with precision, eyes glowing faintly under the hood. There was a power in the air, an energy that made the stones hum beneath their feet. Cale's voice cut through the tension. "You are not welcome here. Leave or face the consequences." The figure laughed softly, a sound that chilled Leora's blood. "You cannot protect her forever, Cale," the intruder said. "The child is destined for a fate she cannot escape, and you will not stop it." Kyle stepped forward, his armor gleaming faintly in the torchlight. "I decide her fate," he said simply, "and I will protect her with my life." The intruder raised a hand, and shadows swirled, forming jagged shapes that reached out toward Kyle. He met them with strength, moving with fluid precision, his sword cutting through the darkness, scattering the shapes like smoke. Leora watched, breathless, as the man she had come to trust fought not just for his life but for hers and her child's. The intruder retreated, melting into the shadows with a promise. "This is only the beginning," they whispered. "The prophecy will unfold, and no fortress, no king can stop it." Cale's chest rose and fell with exertion, his dark eyes blazing as he returned to Leora's side. "It will not be the beginning of the end," he said. "Not while I am here." Leora's hands shook as she clutched her baby. Fear and awe mingled inside her. She had never seen anyone move with such power, such control, and yet her heart ached to see the strain on him. The fortress, for all its shadows, felt safer with him standing guard than it had in the open forest. Days passed, and the threat lingered like a shadow across their lives. Cale began teaching Leora how to defend herself. Simple moves at first. Ways to hold a sword, ways to sense danger, ways to move silently. The child watched wide-eyed as the bond between mother and protector grew stronger. Leora found herself leaning on Cale not just for protection, but for guidance. There was a strange intimacy in shared danger, a quiet understanding that needed no words. Yet Cale remained distant in his own way. He would not speak of his past, of the fortress's deeper secrets or of the powers that shaped him, but in his eyes Leora sometimes glimpsed sorrow, regret, and a loneliness so profound it mirrored her own. She began to wonder who Cale had been before the armor, before the fortress, before the world had labeled him an alpha king. One evening, they walked along the battlements together, the child wrapped in Leora's arms. The sky was painted with the deep reds and purples of sunset, and the sea roared far below. The wind tugged at their cloaks, carrying the scent of salt and magic. The prophecy, Leora began hesitantly. Do you really believe it? Kyle's gaze never left the horizon. I do not fear prophecies. I fear what people will do in their name. Fear blinds them, makes them cruel. But I have seen what your child can become, and I will protect her. That is enough for me. Leora felt her heart stir at his words. His conviction was absolute, his protection unwavering. And yet, she could feel the burden he carried, a weight of past sins, regrets, and choices that seemed to press on him even more heavily than the darkness outside. Suddenly, a low roar split the air. Shadows moved along the fortress walls, unnatural in their motion. Cale's hand went to his sword instantly. His body coiled like a spring. Leora's baby cried out, sensing the surge of danger, and Leora clutched her closer. A figure emerged from the darkness, taller than any human, with eyes glowing like embers. The shadows clung to it like a cloak, writhing and shifting. Leora's breath caught. This was no ordinary intruder. This was something ancient, something beyond understanding. Kyle stepped forward, his sword drawn. You will not harm them, he said, voice steady but edged with steel. The creature laughed, a sound that made the stones tremble. The child, she belongs to fate, it hissed, and no king, no fortress can keep her from it. Cale moved like lightning, his sword slicing through the air. The shadows attacked, but Cale's skill was unmatched. He fought not just with strength, but with purpose, defending Leora and her child with every fiber of his being. Leora watched, heart racing, realizing that his power was not just in the sword, but in his will, his determination, his refusal to let fear dictate their lives. For hours, they battled. The creature summoned more shadows, each more dangerous than the last. Cale's armor was scratched, his breath heavy, but he did not relent. Leora, though terrified, felt a strange surge of courage. She had survived the forest, survived rejection, and now she would survive this too, because Cale's presence reminded her that strength was not just in muscle, but in heart. Finally, with a final powerful strike, Cale sent the creature retreating into the darkness. Its voice echoed as it disappeared. This is not over. Fate will find you. Cale lowered his sword, chest heaving, and turned to Leora. It will not find her while I live, he said firmly. Leora's hands shook as she held her baby, tears streaming down her face. I thought we would die, she whispered. Cale stepped closer, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. You are stronger than you know, he said, and she is stronger than you think. But the world is not kind to those who stand apart. We must remain vigilant. The fortress settled into silence once more, but Leora knew it would not last. Danger was a shadow that would always follow them, and the child's power would continue to draw attention. Yet for the first time she felt a spark of hope. She was not alone. She had Cale, and together they could face whatever came. That night, as Leora lay with her child sleeping beside her, she thought of Cale standing guard outside the door. There was a heaviness in the air, a tension that had not left even in the quiet. She realized that the fortress, for all its magic and protection, was not just a refuge, it was a battlefield, and they were in the center of it. Cliffhanger. From the shadows beyond the fortress walls, a figure watched them silently. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and a whisper carried on the wind. Soon, The child will belong to us, and the king will fall. The fortress was quieter than usual, though Leora knew better than to trust silence. Every shadow felt alive. Every whisper of the wind through the stone corridors carried warnings she could not fully understand. Yet for the first time in weeks, she felt a strange calm, because Cale had promised protection, and he had kept that promise with his life. Morning light crept through narrow windows, painting silver streaks across the black stone floors. Leora wrapped her baby close, feeling the warmth and soft breathing that reminded her why survival mattered so deeply. Cale was already awake, standing by the balcony and staring at the horizon. The sea was a restless mirror, waves crashing against the cliffs, and the wind carried both salt and magic in equal measure. "You are thinking too much," Cale said, not turning to face her. "Your mind races like the wind. But action requires focus, not fear." Leora swallowed. I keep thinking about what will happen if we fail, about what's coming for my child." Cale's eyes darkened, a storm behind them. "The child is strong, but even the strongest need guidance, and we have little time. The shadows will not wait for us to be ready." He moved closer, his presence both commanding and comforting. Leora felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. For weeks, she had lived in constant fear, running from a world that rejected her. Now, for the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she was not alone. Kyle led them to a narrow staircase hidden behind a tapestry. It descended into the fortress's depths, where the stone walls were etched with glowing runes and the air shimmered with power. Leora held her baby tightly, her pulse quickening. She could feel the magic in the walls, alive and restless. "This is where the fortress remembers," Cale said, his voice echoing softly. "These halls hold knowledge, power, and danger. We go now to face the curse and to claim the future we choose, not the one fate has written for us." Leora nodded, her grip on the baby tightening. She did not fully understand what they would face, but she knew it would be perilous. She had survived the forest, survived the hunters, and survived despair. She could face this too, if Cale was by her side. The stairway opened into a chamber carved from the heart of the mountain. The walls pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, and in the center of the room lay a circular stone altar, etched with symbols that shimmered in silver and deep purple. Cale stepped forward, placing his hand upon the altar. "The curse is bound here," he said. "It stems not from your child alone, but from my lineage. My ancestors made mistakes, and the echoes of those mistakes have waited for generations. Tonight we end it." Leora's eyes widened. "Your ancestors? What do they have to do with my child?" Cale's gaze softened, though the storm in his eyes never fully faded. "The prophecy marks your child because she is part of a chain, a link that was meant to heal what was broken or destroy it completely. My family's sins have left the world unbalanced. Your child carries the potential to restore it, or to shatter it. That is why they come for her." Leora took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the truth. She had feared her child's difference, but now she understood its importance. The child was not cursed. She was the key to something far greater. Cale guided her to stand beside the altar. "We will perform the ritual together. It will test us, reveal our fears, and confront the darkness in both of us. You must be brave, as must I. Only then can the curse be broken." The chamber darkened, shadows swirling like living things. Leora clutched her baby, feeling the child stir, sensing the power around them. Kyle placed his hands on hers, steadying them. "We are not alone," he said quietly. "We face this together." The runes glowed brighter, and a low hum filled the chamber, vibrating through the stone and into their bones. Leora's heart pounded, but she did not flinch. She could feel the magic reaching out, probing, testing, and she focused on Cale's voice, on his presence, on the promise of protection. The shadows coalesced into a figure, tall, dark, and formless, with eyes like molten silver. It spoke without moving its lips. "You cannot stop what is coming. The child is destined for suffering, and you, Alpha King, will fail her. Kyle stepped forward, his sword drawn, though he knew it was not a weapon that would defeat this force. We decide her fate, he said firmly. Not you, not the past, not prophecy. The figure advanced and the shadows pressed closer. Leora felt a cold wind against her skin, like icy fingers brushing her soul. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but Kyle's hand tightened over hers. Trust me, he whispered. Trust us. Summoning courage she did not know she possessed, Leora stepped forward. We are not afraid, she said, her voice trembling but strong. We face this together. You will not take her from me. The figure recoiled as if struck by her words. Kale nodded, pride and relief flickering across his face. Together they began the ritual, moving with precision and focus. Leora repeated the words Kale instructed, invoking protective forces, binding shadows and calling forth the light of the child's potential. The chamber shuddered, the shadows writhing and shrieking. Leora could feel her own fears, regrets, and doubts pressing in, but Kale's steady presence kept her anchored. Step by step, they pushed back the darkness, combining strength, courage, and love into a force that even the ancient curse could not resist. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. The shadows thrashed and wailed, but Leora and Kale remained steadfast. The child, sensing the culmination of power, released a small glow from within, her tiny hands lifting as if guiding the magic. The room filled with light, silvery and warm, and for a moment all fear and darkness vanished. Then, with a final surge, the shadows screamed and dissolved, leaving the chamber silent but charged with quiet energy. The curse was broken, at least for now. Leora sank to her knees, exhausted, clutching her baby, tears flowing freely. Kyle knelt beside her, his dark armor gleaming in the soft light, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. You did well, he said softly. We did well. The curse has been lifted, but the world will not forget. Danger still lingers. We must remain vigilant. Leora nodded, exhausted but relieved. For the first time she felt hope that her child's life might truly be safe. And yet, she also felt the weight of what they had faced. The shadows, the prophecy, the darkness within Kale and within herself. As they returned to the upper halls of the fortress, the bond between them had deepened. Kale's distance seemed less formidable, and Leora realized that she had begun to trust him, not just for protection, but because he had shown her courage, compassion, and respect. In turn, Kale had seen her strength, her determination, and the fierceness of a mother who would not yield. But even as they walked together, a whisper brushed the edges of Leora's mind, soft, sinister, and distant. The curse may have been broken, but the forces that sought her child were not gone. The fortress, alive as it was, seemed to murmur warnings, and Kale's eyes darkened with realization. Cliffhanger. In the dead of night, beyond the walls of the fortress, a new shadow moved. It carried a power older and darker than anything they had faced, drawn by the child's light. And in the silence a voice whispered, "You may have won this battle, but the war has only begun." The fortress seemed restless that night. The walls hummed softly, alive with the memory of battles past and the pulse of magic still lingering from the ritual. Leora held her baby close, feeling the tiny heartbeat against her own, and stared out at the horizon where storm clouds gathered. Something was coming. She could feel it deep in her bones, a presence more potent than anything they had faced before. Kale stood nearby, his dark eyes scanning the cliffs and the dark waters below. His armor reflected the pale moonlight, and his stance was rigid, unyielding. For hours they had waited in silence, listening to the wind, the distant crash of waves, and the whisper of the fortress. Every instinct screamed that the final challenge was near. "This is it," Kyle said quietly, his voice low but firm. "The force that comes for your child will test everything, strength, courage, and the bond between us." "Be ready," Leora nodded, though fear pressed heavily against her chest. She had survived so much already, but the weight of what was coming felt different. She had faced rejection, darkness, and curses, but this was more personal. a reckoning that could decide their lives and the future of her child. The first sign came as a ripple through the air. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, bending and twisting as if alive. A cold wind swept through the fortress, carrying whispers of power and malice. The ground trembled faintly, and Leora could feel the magic that had been latent for generations awakening in response to the approaching force. Cale drew his sword, the blade gleaming with an otherworldly light that matched the runes on the walls. "Stay behind me," he ordered. "Whatever comes, we face it together. I will not let harm touch you or your child." Leora's heart clenched at the intensity in his eyes. She felt both fear and reassurance, knowing that the man who had become her protector, her guide, and perhaps something deeper, would not falter. She tightened her grip on her baby and stepped closer to Cale, ready to face whatever darkness approached. The shadows converged, forming a figure taller than any human, its eyes glowing like molten silver. Its presence was overwhelming, pressing against their minds, testing their resolve. "The child belongs to fate," the voice hissed, cold and commanding. "She is the key, and you cannot protect her forever." Cale stepped forward, unwavering. "Fate is not a chain," he said firmly. "It is a choice, and I choose to protect her." The figure raised its hands, and the shadows surged, attempting to engulf them. Cale moved with unmatched precision, striking the darkness with his sword, each swing cutting through the malevolence as if slicing smoke. Leora felt a surge of courage rise within her, not fear but determination. She could see Cale's strength, his unwavering resolve, and she knew that together they could face this impossible force. "Leora," Cale called, his voice cutting through the roar of the shadows. "We must bind it. Repeat the words from the ritual." Taking a deep breath, Leora chanted the incantation Cale had taught her, her voice steady despite the fear thrumming through her chest. Her child stirred, her small hands glowing faintly with the same energy that had emerged during the ritual. Light spread from the baby, warm and radiant, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. The figure screamed, a sound that shook the fortress walls and echoed across the cliffs. The shadows writhed violently, but Cale and Leora's combined power formed a shield of light that could not be broken. Every step they took, every chant Leora spoke, every movement Cale made, strengthened the bond between them, weaving courage, trust, and love into a force stronger than any curse. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The darkness pressed against them, testing every weakness. But the fortress itself responded, lending its strength. The runes on the walls blazed, the air shimmered with power, and the storm outside seemed to pause in awe. Leora felt her heartbeat align with Cale's, and in that moment she understood something profound. They were not just fighting to protect her child. They were rewriting destiny itself. With a final decisive strike, Cale thrust his sword into the ground. Light erupted, pure and blinding, and the figure screamed, its form shattering into thousands of shards of shadow that scattered like smoke in the wind. Leora felt herself fall to her knees, exhausted, but relief washed over her as the oppressive darkness finally lifted. Kyle knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "It is over," he said softly, though his voice carried the weight of every battle they had faced. "The curse is gone. The shadows have no hold here." Leora held her baby close, tears flowing freely. We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief and joy. "We survived." Kyle's dark eyes softened as he looked at her. "You were brave," he said. "Stronger than you realize. And your child. She is destined for greatness. But remember, strength comes not just from power, but from love, trust, and courage. That is what will guide her." For the first time since she had been abandoned and rejected, Leora allowed herself to relax completely. The fortress, once cold and foreboding, felt like a home. Cale's presence, once intimidating, felt like a sanctuary. And the child, radiant and peaceful in her arms, was a promise of hope. Days turned into weeks, and the fortress settled into a calm rhythm. Kyle and Leora trained together, explored the halls, and slowly, the walls that had once felt intimidating became a place of learning, strength, and connection. Leora's confidence grew, not just as a mother, but as a protector, a woman who had faced darkness and emerged stronger. Cale's respect for her deepened as well. He had seen her courage, her determination, and her unwavering love for her child. The distance he had maintained began to soften, replaced with quiet moments of understanding, shared laughter, and the unspoken acknowledgement of a bond forged in fire and shadow. One evening, They stood together on the highest balcony watching the sunset. The sea below reflected the gold and crimson of the sky, and the fortress seemed at peace for the first time in generations. Leora held her child close, feeling a profound sense of completion. "You have changed everything," Kale said quietly. "Not just for your child, but for me. I had forgotten what it meant to hope, to trust, to care for someone beyond duty and power. You've reminded me." Leora looked at him, her eyes shining with emotion. "And you've saved us," she replied. "All of us. Not just with your strength, but with your heart." Kale's gaze softened, and for a long moment silence passed between them. Not awkward, but filled with understanding. They had faced shadows, curses, and the weight of prophecy together. They had survived. And in that survival they had discovered something more powerful than magic or destiny. The bond of trust and love. But the world beyond the fortress was vast, and even though the curse had been broken, Leora knew they could not live forever in isolation. She glanced down at her child, radiant and strong, and felt a determination settle within her. Together they would face the future, whatever it held. As night fell, the fortress seemed to hum in approval, the ancient magic settling into calm, protective patterns. Leora and Kale watched over their child, the stars reflected in the eyes of the sea and the sky above. There was peace, but also the knowledge that vigilance would always be necessary. And yet, for the first time, Leora allowed herself to hope, not for safety alone, but for life, for love, and for a future that they would shape together. Final cliffhanger. Ending. High above the cliffs, a single star flickered unusually bright, almost as if acknowledging the child's destiny. Leora whispered to Kale, "Whatever comes next, we will face it together." Kale nodded, holding both Leora and the child close. Beyond the fortress, the world waited, but inside their walls, the darkness had been conquered, at least for now.